Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to our rather autumnal October Lunchtime Dial-In. We're so pleased that you could join us today, and we're looking forward to discussing the latest updates as they relate to your churches and Christian charities. If you're new with us, my name is Jackie Fletcher, and I'm Head of Treasurer Services here at Stewardship. I'm joined today by three of my colleagues. You'll hear from Lawrence Duplessis, who is Director of Church and Charity Professional Services, Archie McDowell, who's Head of our Accounts Examination Service, and Stephen Matthews, one of our senior consultants and a familiar voice to many of you, I'm sure. So in case you're new to Stewardship, our vision is for the world to encounter Jesus through the generosity of his church. And the purpose of today's dial-in is to strengthen Christian causes, to make you good to give to. If you'd like to find out more about how we could support your church or charity, you can check out all of our services and resources on our website, or do feel free to call our church and charity team and chat to one of our advisors. The number's on your screen now and will also be sent out in the follow-up email later today. I can see we've actually got a phone call listener today. So if you're signed up for the follow-up email, you'll receive the slides too at that point. Lot to get through today. The Charity Commission have been very active on many aspects of charity governance in the past few months. So this dial-in is very much focused on the Charity Commission and their outputs. So therefore, our agenda today includes the new My Charity Commission account. We'll be looking at overseas ministries, governance, and the Charity Commission. There's a simplification of rules for the sale or lease of charity land, and we'll bring you an update on that. Giving overseas, annual return questions and written agreements, and a Charity Commission's new investment guidance. We'll also have a mention, and very, very briefly, we're going to direct you to some resources on charities and social media following some updated, you've guessed it, Charity Commission guidance. And this will be followed by our usual Q&A session at the end. So do bring your questions. And you can pop them into the chat, and we'll ask as many as we can in the time that we have together. If you haven't joined us before, the instructions are on your screen now. If you've previously emailed your questions, then I already have those, so no need to send those again. But thank you for being so organised and prepared. We appreciate it. Before we move on to our agenda, I'd just like to pray very quickly. Lord, we thank you for each church and charity represented here today as they work for your kingdom and your glory. We pray that the various topics that we discuss will be helpful in providing knowledge, integrity, and confidence, and that we will be good witnesses for you in our communities and beyond. Help us to serve you well for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Without further ado, we will go to our first agenda item, and that is with Lawrence, who is going to talk us through a new My Charity Commission account. Lawrence.
Thank you, Jackie. Now, the Charity Commission has finally launched its long-awaited My Charity Commission account as an important new digital tool for trustees. And this is one they call their new front door for charities, actually. So as of September 2023, this rollout is well underway, and it's set to change the way charities in the UK manage their administrative tasks and interact with the regulatory body. The old digital service that we are familiar with, if not new and loved, then definitely new, was decommissioned on 31 July 2023. So let's just have a closer look at what this new account entails. Now, it is a user-friendly digital platform designed to streamline administrative processes for charity trustees. It offers a suite of features aimed at simplifying compliance and enhancing transparency in the charitable sector. Again, a lot of it ties in as well with the Charity Commission's whole agenda on data, gathering better data, and making that data available. So some key aspects of this platform is registration and access. Charitable organizations and their trustees can register for this account, and it providing essential information for verification. And once registered, you gain access to a secure online dashboard tailored to your charity. Previously, there was essentially one login and account per charity. Now, all trustees, advisors, such as lawyers and accountants and charity contacts will have their own account. Now, the charity's main contact should have received an invite by now, and they can set different levels of access. So I think that's important. All of the trustees and so on wouldn't have received an invite for the charity. The invite would have gone to the main contact, and that's not the public information, the contact information on your public register page. It would have been the person set as the primary contact for the Charity Commission. Now, I'm aware that when I said it is a user-friendly platform designed to streamline administrative processes, many of you, if we could have heard you, would have been laughing out loud. Now, I promise I will come back to that. Now, also, one of the key features is still the ability, once you get access, of course, to submit annual returns and financial accounts electronically, and that eliminates the need for paper submissions and simplifies the compliance process. So overall, the interface seems more user-friendly once you get access. It's also a document repository, so it provides a centralized repository for important documents, including governing documents, financial reports, and regulatory correspondence. So if you have regulatory correspondence with the Charity Commission, that should be available in this new account. And trustees can access these documents easily, promoting transparency and accountability across the trustee board. For example, everybody can see the same information. It's also meant to facilitate direct communication between trustees and the Charity Commission. So trustees can seek advice, request clarification on regulatory matters, and receive updates through the platform. Some of these functions, for example, asking permission to pay a trustee for another role if your governing document doesn't allow it, currently has to be done outside of the account through online forms. And until that account rollout is much further progressed, some of these will still be done outside of the account. The idea is to eventually migrate all of that to the account. So like I said, all main charity contacts should have received an invitation from the Charity Commission to set up a new account. If you haven't, contact them on the details on your screen, and we will send it out later after the call if you don't have a pen to hand. And that main charity contact can set up trustees with individual accounts and give access to third parties. Now, challenges and future developments. I said I would come back to this question of it being a user-friendly platform. Now, despite its potential, the rollout is not without challenges. I think that's fair to say. The Charity Commission has experienced very high levels of inquiries to its contact center, and that has also been impacting on the response times for other types of queries. So there's a knock-on effect. Some contacts have struggled to access their accounts. That contributed very much to these high levels of queries and long call times. And the Charity Commission has encouraged customers to email that account, myaccount@charitycommission.gov.uk, if they need a new link to sign up. And I understand. I am a trustee of more than a handful of charities, and for most of them, we don't seem to have been contacted in the first place. And because we don't have access to the old system anymore, you can't even check who was ticked as the official contact. And like I said, that's different to the information on your public profile. So that would have been supposedly the person to have received the invitation to set up that main new account. And that's the only person who can create accounts for the other trustees, employees, advisors, and so on. It is really frustrating. And I understand the Commission is inundated with requests to help people get access. So just in the last couple of weeks, I've heard from one of our clients who was on the phone to the Commission for hours without success. It is frustrating. Some people have managed to get access very easily, but it's right to acknowledge that many people are still struggling. Unfortunately, I can't provide much direct help there or comfort, but the Commission has said that if people miss filing deadlines due to not having access to their accounts, and that is imminent for a lot of December year-end charities who have to file their accounts by the end of this month, the Commission has said that in those cases, they will look kindly on those cases and mark them so the charities don't have incorrect late filing red marks on their public records. So communicate with the Commission, get it on record, I think is my advice. Of course, another challenge beyond these initial teething pains is that some smaller or less technologically inclined charities may encounter difficulties adapting to the digital platform. Charities will need to make sure that eventually all their trustees are able to access this resource when that functionality becomes available. Particularly those who need extra help in dealing with digital platforms such as this might need to think about how to get some assistance there. And lastly, the 2023 annual return is now finally available on the new service from the 6th of October. So just under 2 weeks, hot off the press. And if I'm honest, I was fully expecting to say today that it is not live as of this morning, but it did become live in the last 2 weeks. It was expected in late August, so it's welcome it's finally available. And charities could, in the meantime, it wasn't available from up to now, but in the meantime, charities could have reviewed the question set at least, and there'll be a link in the follow-up email after the call. But you can now finally complete the annual return for year ends that fall after the end of 2022. So that's any year end from 1 January 2023 onwards. So predominantly that would be March year ends, I would think, June year ends, September year ends, if you are that quick off the mark. If you've been chomping at the bit to complete your 2023 return, you can now do it. Of course, if you can get access to the account in the first place. And we will do some questions later on. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Lawrence. So yes, there will be more information on that, and I can see we already have a couple of questions for you. But for now, we're going to move on to our second item today from Stephen, who's bringing us some valuable lessons from recent Charity Commission inquiries into faith charities working overseas. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Jackie. Now, in July 2023, the Charity Commission launched 2 inquiries into charities which raise funds for Jewish faith institutes. The regulator's concerns relate to financial management and controls within those charities, including the use of signed blank cheques. Whilst this inquiry is about charities which raise funds for faith works in Israel, it echoes concerns that the Commission reported on last year on Christian churches and ministries. Now, in this recent inquiry, the regulator was concerned about the charity's financial management after discovering that one trustee who lives in Israel was in possession of the charity's checkbooks, containing several blank cheques pre-signed by the trustees who live in the UK. Also, that the charities operate heavily in cash and did not maintain adequate records on its use. Now, critically, the trustees could not provide adequate evidence on how they were monitoring or verifying the end use of the charity's funds that were spent overseas. Let's just talk a moment about cash. Regulators simply hate it. The Commission is regularly advising against its use. HMRC said to me in a meeting, no decent organisation uses cash a lot. It is like pouring water onto a dry, sandy beach. After a minute, there is no sign of where it is gone. So, this is an important reminder that all charities working or giving overseas need to take extra care to ensure and document that the money was used properly at the far end. Be aware that the cost of not doing this can be very significant, and be reminded that cash is rarely a good mechanism for payment. As said, no decent organisation uses cash a lot. Because of banking issues and hassle, it can be very tempting to strap cash around your waist and give it wherever it's thought needed, but resist that temptation. If it is thought to be the right way to operate, the trustees should, in a formal way, document why it is worth the risks, together with the risk assessments of how to protect against its obvious dangers. And there are a lot of obvious dangers. Now, examples of a reason why it could be so important is danger to the recipients if official banking mechanisms are used or traceable mechanisms are used, death or persecution, or, but this is much less so, extraordinarily high banking costs. So, governance weaknesses were like the 2 cases the Commission reported on in 2022 in respect of 2 London-based churches. In these cases, the London churches, the Commission commented on the following. 1. a lack of trustee involvement in terms of time, thought, initiative, and challenge on how things were being done, which led on to little evidence that financial controls were being seriously designed and applied across the organisation, which led on to 3, a lack of culture of responsibility or challenge in governance, which led on to 4, the dominance in all decisions, financial or otherwise, by a small group of leaders, which led on to 5, senior leaders with little or no financial accountability, and 6, suspicion that funds were used for personal and not charitable aims at times. In other words, public finance was run like that of a private family. In both the churches reported on by the Commission, the impact of these weaknesses was not just the negative comments from the regulators, but significant reputational damage in the church and also in the wider community. And ultimately, in the case of one of them, ending in bankruptcy because the tax impact of their uncontrolled expenditure. How we handle giving and spending overseas and how it is documented really does matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really sound advice, very helpful. So next, Archie is going to join in and bring us an update on the simplification of rules for the sale or lease of charity land following the Charities Act 2022. Archie.
Thank you and good afternoon. As you will be aware from previous dial-ins, the changes which were made in the 2022 Charities Act have been introduced in stages, and the latest of these simplified the rules for selling or leasing charity land and were introduced in June 2023. The basic principle under the Charities Act is that a charity cannot sell or lease out land to a tenant in England and Wales without either obtaining the approval of the Charity Commission or the court, or obtaining a written report from a qualified advisor. This principle applies to almost all charities who might want to sell or lease out land in England and Wales, whether you're registered with the Charity Commission, accepted from registration under a denominational exception, or not required to register because you're below the £5,000 income threshold. However, different rules apply to charity land in Scotland and Northern Ireland. The purpose of the rule is to protect charity assets by ensuring that the charity trustees act in the best interests of their charity and in line with their charitable objects. Generally, this will mean obtaining the best terms for a sale or lease of land. However, there is an exception where a charity disposes of land at undervalue in order to further its own charitable objects. For example, a church with a surplus building might decide to sell that building to a new church plant at a reduced price in order to further their shared mission of advancing the gospel. The June 2023 changes simplify the process of obtaining qualifying advice on a sale or lease in 2 ways. The first is by widening the categories of professionals who can provide the advice. Under the old rules, the advice had to be provided by an RICS qualified surveyor. Under the new rules, the advice can alternatively be provided by a member of Property Mark or a qualified agricultural valuer. This should make it easier to find a valuation professional with the right expertise. The charity trustees must satisfy themselves that the advisor has the ability and experience to value land of the type and in the location in question. The second change is a considerable simplification to the list of matters which the written report must cover. Under the old rules, there was a detailed list of items which were not necessarily relevant to the property in question, including, for example, the measurements of rooms in any buildings on the land. The new rules are much more flexible and simply require the advisor to report on the value and what the trustees to do to enhance that value, including by how they market the property. The trustees must then consider the report and decide whether they are satisfied that the terms are the best that can reasonably be obtained. So we're focused today on the recent changes to the rules for advice on sales and leases. If you'd like a more detailed summary of the Charities Act property provisions, including the rules which apply if your charity mortgages its land, then we'll be sending out our updated briefing paper after this call. Thank you.
Thank you, Archie. Yes, that briefing paper does go into a lot more detail. So if that's relevant to you, do have a read and it will hopefully answer any questions that you may have. Let's move on to the next item, giving overseas annual returns and written questions. And Stephen is going to talk to us about that.
Thank you, Jackie. Many UK churches give money to support projects overseas. It is rare that they consider themselves involved in or running the project, but they do recognise the significant value that a little bit of UK sterling can bring to the church elsewhere in the world. UK churches tend to be very relational in the way they develop and manage their vision. We tend not to consider written agreements to be a key part of what we do, especially when we've seen a project, understood the desired outcomes and trust those doing it to make it succeed. However, there is a place for the greater formality of written agreements when money is at stake. This is for several reasons. First is this: misunderstandings can occur, especially when there are cultural and language differences. We all want to serve God and help those in need, but being humans, we do start from different understandings. Also, situations change and our assumptions about what then happens can differ. It's not wrong or right, it's just different. Secondly, tax outcomes can be different. We don't normally think about tax as churches, but when giving money overseas, we really should. HMRC have to manage a lot of different situations, and for reasons I won't go into here, the tax rules require written documentation, depending upon the amount given and the circumstances. More on this in a minute. 3, because regulators recommend it, especially in some circumstances. And this comes from years of experience of seeing charity mess-ups and their desire to prevent naivety creating more of them. So let me start with misunderstandings. For example, in Britain, we assume that if we give money expressly for a particular purpose, it will only be used for that purpose. However, in some cultures, that's not the case. A person to whom money or other resources is entrusted tends to have a major say in how that money or resource will be used. If money is there and another more urgent and equally legitimate requirement arises, then it's considered the right and obvious thing to do is to use the money that is there, given for one purpose, for the different purpose that has arisen, without necessarily telling the grant maker. Moving on to tax. HMRC have set some specific guidance and regulations in place when charities pay money overseas. It is set out in a document that isn't really very excitingly called Annex 2 Non-Charitable Expenditure, Section 9. Now, Section 9.6 specifically refers to the requirement for guarantees or assurances that have been obtained from the overseas body that the payment will be applied for the purpose for which it was given, such as a partnership or other written enforceable agreement, ... close inverted commas. And then they give some examples indicating the sort of documentation expected. In HMRC's eyes, it is not enough to trust that those at the other end will do what was expected. So what's the cost? Well, if it isn't meeting what HMRC expect it to meet, they can tax what you have given overseas, i.e. roughly 30% of what you gave can go in tax. Thirdly, I talked about regulators' recommendations. In the 2023 Charity Annual Return questions that Lawrence has recently referred to, the Charity Commission asks in question 3.2 about delivering charitable activities outside of the United Kingdom. Did your charity deliver charitable activities outside the United Kingdom in the financial period of this return? This includes giving or granting money to organisations who work in that country. And unless the amounts are trivial, the next question is, does your charity have formal written agreements in place with any partners delivering charitable activities on its behalf outside of the United Kingdom? And goes on to say, it is good practice for charities to formalise in writing any agreements with partners or third parties delivering charitable services on its behalf. Where some written agreements are in place, but not in all cases, you should answer in part. They then go on to describe what they consider to be a formal written agreement. And they say, usually in the form of a binding legal contract, setting out the nature of the relationship and the respective roles and responsibilities of the charity and the partner, blah, blah, blah. And they're suggesting some templates. It should be noted that the Commission explained there is no specific legal requirement to enter into a partnership agreement, but it is the main way, particularly where risks are high, that trustees can show they've properly protected the charity's legal position and have acted in its best interests, which in their parlance means you're warned if you don't. They then go on to say a partnership agreement is usually a binding legal contract, although it will depend on how it's drafted. It usually sets out the nature of the relationship between the charity and the partner and outlines respective roles and responsibilities. And they then go on to say what they expect to be covered as minimum good practice, about how the partnership will work, expected outcomes and deliverables, timelines and milestones, how much funding will be provided by the charity, when the work will be done, and how results will be demonstrated in reporting and monitoring arrangements should be working. It does not have to necessarily be in the form of a full-blown partnership agreement. It does very much depend on what role the UK charity has in the work being done. If it is not in determining the shape of the project, or being the main project funder, or sending or receiving personnel for the project, then less may be more. This is often as much about mutual understanding as it is about clear legal documents, especially when the recipients aren't used to legal contracts in how they do business. When the nature of the work is less involved, or amount of funding is small, I would still recommend as a minimum a short grant agreement, which sets out the funding, what the funding is to be spent on, a guarantee the funds will be refunded to the UK charity if not used in the way agreed, and what reporting back is required and by when. This also helps to meet the HMRC requirements that they outline, hence why it can be really important. The Commission guidance goes on to say, if the amount of funding involved is very small, the arrangement is minor or insignificant, and or with very low risk involved, it may be proportionate not to have a written legal agreement. Personally, I'd always recommend a clear email trail on what the gift or grant was for, and also have notes of key conversations or visits out to the project. Now, let's just talk about relationship and trust for a moment. When introducing written agreements, one of the issues that can come up is the sense from the group overseas of, don't you trust us? And sometimes this approach that we're adopting is like the colonial past when European ways of working were imposed on overseas colonies. This can be difficult and normally requires facing it fairly early in the process as an understanding that this is not about personal trust, but it is about the legal and tax implications of a UK charity, without which the gift becomes smaller, more difficult, or impossible. Now, in conclusion, I would say legal documents in no way replace clear human communication relationship, but they certainly can help. It is important to reduce misunderstandings and save tax, and ensure the right thought has been put in place, and demonstrate the charity has done what it could to protect its investment of money, time, and reputation. UK churches and charities do a fantastic job in sharing the mission of Jesus across the world. Written agreements are an unexciting but important support in achieving this vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, very much for that. We are getting a lot of questions coming in, so thank you for those. If you haven't asked your question yet, do be typing it into the chat. We're just going to go on to our fifth item today, which is the new investment guidance from the Charity Commission, and Lawrence is going to bring us a bit on that. Lawrence.
Thank you, Jackie. There have been some important changes in the investment guidance regime for charities, with the Charity Commission issuing an updated version of their guidance, CC14, following the Butler-Sloss case in the High Court. Now, I'm not going to summarize the whole court judgment, but the outcome is that charities are now allowed to consider ethical investment priorities and non-financial consequences from their investment policies, not just the financial return. Now, previously, these could only be secondary factors to maximizing investment returns, and trustees who didn't prioritize financial returns were at risk of legal consequences. Now, this might be more relevant for some charities than others. Those without investment portfolios might think it's less directly applicable, and many charities could only wish for a large investment portfolio. But for all charities, it speaks to how we actively consider how well we're using all of our resources to further our charitable purposes. So the background of this guidance, investment guidance CC14 is a cornerstone resource for charities in the UK. It outlines the principles and guidelines governing the investment of charitable funds. And the guidance aims to strike a balance between maximizing returns and protecting assets, all while aligning investments with the charity's mission. Now, just a bit on the Butler-Sloss case. It's obviously a long judgment and so on, but just a bit. The two charitable grant-making trusts, the Ashton Trust, of which Sarah Butler-Sloss was a trustee, and the Mark Leonard Trust brought the case to seek confirmation that their trustee boards were not overstepping their legal rights and responsibilities by aligning the trust's investment policies with their mission. Now, the trust's wide charitable objects include the protection of the environment, so the trustees wanted to avoid conflict between their investment and the charitable objectives by seeking to align their investment policy with the goals of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, you can imagine, you might be driven in a certain direction where you have to invest in fossil fuel companies by trying to maximize investment returns. So they wanted to avoid that kind of a thing. Now, the trusts were successful. The High Court judgment permitted both trusts to adopt the proposed investment policies after the judge found that the trustees had exercised their powers of investment properly. So you can achieve potentially lower financial returns or run higher risk with your portfolio if that is done to further your charitable purposes. Conversely, chasing higher financial returns only for higher risk might not be prudent. So what's the influence of this case on CC14? Now, the Charity Commission took the lessons from this case to heart when they were revising CC14. That the case underscored the importance of trustees' fiduciary duty and their responsibility to make prudent investment decisions. So this guidance placed a renewed emphasis on the need for charity trustees to act with care and diligence when managing charitable assets. Some of the key updates. CC14 now explicitly states that charity trustees have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the charity. Trustees must exercise reasonable care, skill, and diligence when making investment decisions. The guidance also emphasizes that trustees should consider the charity's long-term objectives, risk tolerance, and ethical considerations. The revised CC14 also highlights the importance of diversifying investments to spread risk. It recommends that charities should have a clear investment strategy that takes into account their risk tolerance and the need to preserve capital while generating returns. Now, this only applies if you're making investments, not, for example, if you have some money in the bank. Be proportionate as you consider all of these factors. It does mean that you can't have maybe one single trustee who dabbles in the stock market as a hobby, taking control of the charity's money and investing it in that one stock that is definitely going to double in value next week because he had a mate who told him about a tip. And some of that would be illegal potentially anyway, if it's insider trading. Do diversify investments to spread risk. Get advice. Ethical investments. The updated guidance acknowledges the growing interest in ethical and sustainable investments in the charitable sector, and it encourages charities to consider their ethical values and mission when making investment choices. The guidance itself avoids using terms like ethical investment because that can be nebulous, but it raises the principle of investing in line with your ethical values. Lastly, transparency and reporting. CC14 now requires charities to provide greater transparency in their investment practices. Charities are encouraged to disclose their investment policies, objectives, and performance in their annual reports, ensuring accountability to stakeholders. What are the implications for charities? Now, charities must adapt to the changes brought about by the updated CC14. You can't just wish it away or carry on like you have before. Trustees would need to re-evaluate their investment strategies, ensuring they align with the guidance's new principles. This includes conducting regular reviews of investment policies, assessing risk tolerance, and considering ethical investment options. The question of how to apply this in each church or Christian charities context is way too broad and too specific for us to evaluate and discuss here. But I think two things stand out. Firstly, trustees should take active responsibility for how their investment portfolios are invested and managed, even if that is outsourced to a professional fund manager. You have to engage with that fund manager and ask the questions and make sure you're aware of what they're doing. You can, secondly, and may invest in so-called more risky areas if they support your charitable purposes and you are able to, within reason, safeguard your capital. Now, I must stress, this is not formal investment advice, and you must take formal advice from an appropriate person before taking any action. Trustees cannot and should not say, Stewardship said we're allowed to do this or invest in this stock. It's generally an expectation from the Commission that trustees should get appropriate advice if they don't have the expertise. So unless you have in-house expertise, like for example, a trustee who's a financial manager or a financial advisor, you have to get appropriate advice. In conclusion, so this revised guidance, CC14, represents a significant step forward in ensuring that charities uphold their fiduciary duty to protect and grow their assets responsibly. So trustees must take heed of the new guidance, prioritize prudent investment practices, diversification, transparency, and ethical considerations to fulfill their mission while safeguarding their financial resources. By doing so, charities can continue to make a positive impact while securing their long-term financial sustainability in an ever-evolving financial landscape. Now, this is a lot to consider, and very few of us are financial experts. So this section aims to highlight the question, and trustees, you do need to take advice. Now, we'll put a link to Stewardship's own investment strategy in the follow-up email, so you can see how we as a charity also think about our own stewardship role in looking after the assets God has entrusted to our care. Thank you, Jackie. Jackie, I think you might be on mute.
I'm so sorry, I am. I'll repeat myself, I'm so sorry. We just raising awareness of the new guidance from the Charity Commission on charities and social media. This area is fraught with difficulties and substantial risk, particularly in the boundary between personal and organisational social media use. So we'd encourage you to read these recently issued publications on the subject to help trustees and leaders discern how best to approach this area to retain the integrity, reputation and accountability of your church and charity. So these links will be going out after in the follow-up email, but something else that may be helpful is that we have produced a template social media usage policy available in our online shop, both as an individual item and also as part of the policy pack that contains most of the policies listed in the new annual return questions. So those links will be sent out afterwards. And that brings us to the end of our agenda for today. I'm going to go straight on to questions. There are other ways we can help you. You'll see all this afterwards, but we do have a lot of questions, so we're going to move on to those now. Bear with me. I think so that is all we've got time for today. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to your questions. Very busy, obviously very interesting topics for you. So do look out for that follow-up email. There will be a brief survey in there that should take no longer than 3 minutes. I know I ask every time, but we really thank those of you who took time to respond last time. It is really helpful to us. If you haven't given us your feedback for a while, please do. We do read every word. And if you send a question, that's fine, but please remember to give your email address. Otherwise, we won't be able to get back to you. So that would be great if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes. We'd be very, very grateful for that. The date of our next dial-in, that's going to be the 15th of February 2024. We really hope you'll be able to join us. Please do pass on the invitation to anyone you think may be interested in coming along. And finally, just to say thank you to our panelists, to Lawrence, Stephen and Archie, for taking the time to share their expertise, for answering your questions so thoroughly as well. And thank you to you for joining us today. We hope you found it helpful. Thank you for those of you putting comments in to say it has been. That's really encouraging. We appreciate it. So we just pray that you and your organisations will be a blessing to those that you serve over the coming months. And we will hope to see you again in the new year. Bless you.